now to take that discussion forward on the context that the economic survey is likely to set for a possible universal basic income scheme is Nitin Desai, the former Chief Economic Advisor and Under Secretary General Economic and Social Affairs, United Nations. Mr. Desai, thanks very much for joining us on India Business Hour. Let me start by asking you about what you make of the possibility of a universal basic income scheme being brought in by the government. Our understanding is that perhaps the economic survey will lay out the context, a cost-benefit analysis, maybe even suggest a pilot project which the government could take forward. But how will this work as far as the government's fiscal roadmap is concerned? And do you believe a universal basic income scheme will only be possible if the government were to phase out some other subsidies?
Yes, you're absolutely right that it is not something which is sustainable if the government does not phase out the other subsidies. It has to be as a substitute for the others. The basic logic behind the basic income idea is that instead of telling people that, okay, you'll get a subsidy if you consume this or if you buy this or etc., you tell them this is your income support and you decide what you will spend it on. Now, the problem with this is fine in a country where you have basically solved all problems of public goods. Take, for instance, immunization. Now, this is something which you have to do because it gives benefits not just to one family, but to many others because it reduces the pool of infection. Now, if you are living in a country where all this has been taken care of, you can talk of a basic income because the main focus of household support is for individuals. But in our case, there's a huge demand for public goods. Immunization, health services, education, roads, clean water supply, which delivers benefits not just to an individual household, but to a community. So I would say that in a country like India, the idea of a universal basic income is clearly very premature. If you had to experiment, do it piecemeal in a few areas. For instance, maternal and child health or something like this. This is what many people have advanced. Will it be done? I'd be very surprised. I doubt if there is a political capacity to get rid of all subsidies. What we should start with are the subsidies which do not deliver benefits to the poor. Let's start with those.
Okay.
And then we can work towards something like universal support. The other point that will clearly not fly in India is the universal part of it. Because the whole idea is you don't try and choose. Okay, this person gets it, that person does not. Give it to everybody. And if Mr. Ambani also gets 1,000 rupees a month, it's not going to make that much difference to him. You see. So that's the logic behind the whole proposal. But I think it's frankly premature. It's
too premature. You know, that's the sense that I get as well when I speak with people within government, that there is a conversation on. It's an option that's been explored, but it's a work in progress. No decision has been taken. If you were in Arvind Subramaniam's shoes today and you were in a sense asked by the government to lay out a framework for a possible universal basic income scheme, what would you suggest? I
would suggest that I think perhaps what Arvind is trying to do is to suggest that have a rational, thought-out approach to subsidies. Work out why you are giving this subsidy. And in some ways, by putting up the idea of a universal basic income, he is provoking that conversation. Don't just add subsidies ad hoc here and there, but have a view that, yes, and this is like, for instance, I mentioned, in immunization, it makes a lot of sense to give a subsidy because you are reducing the pool of infection which you'll have. So I think my guess is that this is really not meant to be something which the government is going to implement, but I hope it is something which persuades the government to have a worked out, sensible, rational approach to a subsidy so that we know why are we giving this. It shouldn't just accumulate thoughtlessly.
Ron?
Good evening, Mr. Desai. This is Ronajoy from the Delhi studio. It's interesting you say that how if it's were to be implemented in India, it should be universal in scope, unlike what Finland did earlier this year, which was to target only those who are sitting without jobs. Now the question is, what will be the fiscal impact of that? When Arvind Subramanian was talking last year, September, October, he proposed about 15,000 rupees per household every year. And he had suggested that the government should target only those who are below the poverty line. Now, if that is the case, the question then arises, which poverty formula should you adopt? The one that was proposed by late Suresh Tendulkar, or should we go with the one that Rangarajan had proposed. If you were in his shoes and considering the fiscal constraints, and if you had to identify and target it only to the poor, which of the two formulas would you go with, sir?
I would say that a targeted thing like this is quite unworkable. You'll have a complete mess with people pretending with all manner of certificates and so on that they fall within an eligible category. One of the best ways of targeting is self-selection. This is what we do with the Narega. Narega is self-selecting in the sense that only somebody who is unemployed will come and for work. A rich person is not going to show up for work. So try and do it in a way which becomes self-selecting. And this is why you don't have it as a universal income support, but as something which is linked. It may be work-related. It may be conditional on, say, a child attending school, or it may be conditional on a pregnant woman attending maternity health camps, and so on. So I would argue that in an Indian context, you really have to not necessarily target, but certainly find ways of making sure that you are relying as much as possible on self-selection. If you have a bureaucratic system of selection, it's out. That's why the word universal, that you get away from selection.
Mr. Desai, moving away from the universal basic income scheme, let me ask you a quick question on the budget itself. My understanding is that the big theme and the big emphasis is going to be creating jobs, focusing on sectors that are labor intensive, and 3, post-demonetization, the move towards digitization. In that context, what could the possible big ideas be?
I would say that almost certainly they will have to do something on digitization, incentives, etc., reductions in merchant charges and things of that sort, because now they're selling demonetization essentially as a drive to move towards a cashless society. So I suspect that will be there. As far as the more populist type of stuff is concerned, I think the issue is open. Whether they are going to go in for sort of populist schemes which are giveaways of one sort or another, or whether they're going to go in for schemes which actually try and generate jobs. There is nothing better for helping poor people than job generation.
Absolutely.
It beats any sort of handout,
yes,
and so on. You see. So I suspect that it'll probably, my worry is that it'll probably be more on the populist side, on the handout side, because it's not that easy to deliver and get a lot of political credit for a job, something which will generate jobs maybe over 5 years or something of that sort. But I hope they do that. That is certainly what I would like to see as an economist, something which builds up long-term growth potential in this country.
Well, we'll check in with you on the day of the economic survey and on the day of the budget, Mr. Desai.
We'll look forward to it.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for joining us here on India Business Hour. Well,